Hello again. This is Don Newmer. I'm the Council Commissioner for the PA Dutch Council. We're going to do another continuing education for commissioners today. It's going to be on effective communications. This will be posted to the PA Dutch website. And give me a second here and we'll see if we can't get PowerPoint up and running. All right. So as I said, this will be about effective communications. I mentioned before that in one of the previous trainings that when we're doing, when my wife and I were doing engaged couple counseling for our church, everything, all the issues, all the problems, or all the successes seem to come back to effective communications. I don't care whether the problems were in relationship, intimacy, finances, family, children. It all seemed to come back to either they were successful because they were effectively talking to each other, or they were not successful, and possibly even later on in marriage were not successful because they were failing to communicate with each other. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I think it's important that we understand the need for communications, not only as commissioners, but when we're mentoring the leaders in our units to make sure that they're doing a good job communicating. So to start off, just kind of share a little history here. Aristotle broke down communications into three different parts, and he saw it as some sort of balance. It was the ethos, which was ethical, pathos, which is emotional, and logos, which was logical. Well, the ethos is actually the speaker. It's the person who's sending the message, and it reveals a lot about his or her character through that communications. Another aspect of this can also be the speaker's credibility, whether people are buying what you're giving them, whether you're able to sell your message, whether they trust you. The pathos, that's the receiver, that's the audience, and the emotions are felt by them doing the rhetoric, doing the speaking. Good communications needs to take into account how the audience will feel about the message. So it's not just about delivering the message, it's about anticipating how our audience is going to receive that message. And then finally, it's the message. It's the actual words used by the speaker. This is the logos, or the message. It's your mode for appealing to another sense of reason, ergo the term logic. Employing strengths in strategic thinking, problem solving, and analytical skills are how today's leaders express logical ideas in clear and compelling enough terms to influence outcomes. So let's talk about effective listening, because this is important. Again, as we said before, you have to have a sender and a receiver. So effective listening is important for both the receiver and the sender. Paying attention to not only what is being said, but the body language. And we talked about this in a previous on conflict resolution. So smiling, as long as it's a sincere smile, small smiles, that's easy to say, can be used to show that the listener is paying attention to what's being said, or as a way of agreeing or being happy about the message being received. Eye contact is normal and usually encouraging for the listener to look at the speaker. Eye contact, however, can be intimidating, especially for shy speakers, or challenging when it's a constant stare. Gauge how much eye contact is appropriate for any given situation. Then you have posturing. Posturing can tell a lot about the sender and receiver. The attentive listener tends to lean slightly forward or sideways while sitting. Other signs of attentive listening may include a slight slant of the head or resting the head on one hand. That's not going to sleep, folks. Mirroring. Mirroring is an automatic reflection or mirroring of any facial expressions used by the speaker and can be a sign of attentive listening. These reflective expressions can help to show sympathy and empathy in more emotional situations. Now, obviously, many of these are only going to be successful if you're paying attention to what's being said, how it's being delivered to you. Distractions. The active listener will not be distracted and therefore will refrain from fidgeting, looking at a clock or a watch, or checking electronic devices. Last thing you want to do is have somebody explaining to you a problem that is very serious to them, and you're checking for text messages on your phone. Verbal signs of attentive or active listening, that's remembering. The human mind is notoriously bad at remembering details, especially for any length of time. However, remembering a few key points or even the name of the speaker can help reinforce that the message sent has been received and understood. Taking notes is also helpful. If somebody's going into a very involved explanation of something that's troubling them, even if you think you can remember it, sit down and jot down a few notes because that tells them that you're taking this serious enough to make an effort. You can also repeat back to them what they said. You can maybe rephrase it and say, "Okay, this is what I'm understanding that you're sharing with me," and you're letting them know, "Hey, look, I listened. I'm paying attention. I'm trying to understand what's going on here." Questioning, the listener can demonstrate that they've been paying attention by asking relevant questions and are making statements that build or help clarify what the speaker has said. Reflection, that's what I mentioned before. It's closely repeating or paraphrasing what the speaker had said in short in order to show compassion and understanding. Clarification, that involves asking questions of the speaker to ensure that the correct message has been received. Clarification usually involves use of open questions, which enables the speaker to expand on certain points as necessary. An open question is never the answer for an open question is never yes or no. So you don't ask a question that's so restrictive that you're getting a yes or no answer. You want to encourage the person you're talking with to share what's going on, and the way to do that is to ask more than yes or no questions. In summarization, again, I mentioned that before. Summarize back to the speaker the main points, letting them know that you've received the message and you understand it. Okay, the next communication tool is engaging the receiver. Um, the receiver is your audience, so you want to get them interested and give them a reason to listen. So you could possibly describe a scene or a character that relates to what you're talking about. You can tell a story. I'm a big storyteller, and I can tell you my wife sometimes groans because whenever she asks me something, I want to teach it in a story, and she'll just roll her eyes. She's, just wants the short version. Share a personal experience. It's very important, especially in a teaching role. Uh, Relate to a recent event. Piggyback on a previous speaker's remarks or theme. Use it as a nice transition to where you're talking about if you're following somebody when you're speaking. Show a compelling visual image. That could be whether you're using a PowerPoint to get their attention or you describe something that gives them such a powerful image that they can understand just from imagining that what you're talking about. Point out something important about the audience or the current setting. Ask a provocative question. Now, you're not there to stir things up, but sometimes you want to get people's attention. So you can start off with a provocative question to get people thinking. State a fact that's troubling, amusing, or remarkable. Spell out what's at stake for your listeners. We talk about that in education's learning objectives. This is what the listener is going to get out of it, and this is why it's important. Offer a humorous observation or anecdote, again, as long as it's a proper fits in and isn't insulting. Explain your own interest in the topic, and tell listeners what the topic has to do with them. So what are some of the barriers when we're communicating with people? What are some of the problems that we run into? Or it could be lack of common ground. Um, that's really a lack of understanding. We all come from different experiences, and if we come from extremely different, for instance, if I'm talking to parents who've never been in scouting, and I'm relating everything to scouting, and I'm using slang terms and jargon and things that, talking about Cracker Barrels. I come home and tell my family, yeah, we put together a Cracker Barrel for OA tonight. Well, I had no idea that Cracker Barrel was an evening snack and OA was Order the Arrow. So, kind of consider your audience and be careful using jargon, acronyms, that type of thing, or technical terms. Could be a lack of sincerity. A speaker needs to be trusted, must care about the receiver getting the message. I've gone in places where the speaker is literally just reading off a script, not making eye contact, really could care less about the message that they're putting out there. And of course, we all instantly tune that person out. And then emotional barriers. Some people may find it difficult to express their emotions. Some topics might be off limits or taboo. Um, it might cause, remember I said provocative questions, it might cause too much of a provocation that people are going to shut you down. So, there's a gray line there. A lack of authority. This kind of boils down to the people you're talking to need to understand that you have the experience and the expertise in what you're speaking about. That sometimes can be a pre-introduction where they give a little background. Now, you don't want to go overboard. I can tell you right now, I've got probably 3 single-space pages of all the schools I've gone through in military and law enforcement. I don't have to have somebody read all that off, but a simple little bio could help. Um, I've actually used places where I've taught to law enforcement and there's a real question, they may have a question on what my background is. I'll in essence put a resume in a notebook in the back along with a little bio of who I am. And if they have any questions, they can go take a look at it. You can tell a little about yourself, but you don't want to come off as bragging or being above people. Uh, could be a lack of clarity. Uh, before I when I put training together, I look at, and even if I'm going to speak, I look at, I'll create an agenda or an outline. I'll try to transition. I'll make sure that the message that I want to get across is very clear, that I'm accurate in what I'm saying. The last thing you want to do is be talking about something and people go, well, wait a minute, those aren't the right numbers. Why are you coming into my troop claiming that we lost 20% of people last year when, we actually gained 3%. So you want to make sure you got your facts straight when you're coming in. You want to avoid distractions. And distractions, they can be also, it can be what's going on in the meeting room, what's going outside of the meeting room, things, different. I hate those meeting rooms where they're having breakout sessions and everybody's in the same meeting room. If something else is going on over there and everybody's laughing about it and they seem to be having fun, do you think anybody's going to pay attention to what I'm saying? They're all interested in what's going on over there. And respect that there are different viewpoints. Um, there are going to be people you're talking to that aren't going to agree with you. That's the nature, that's human nature. Some people you're never going to convince, and you have to recognize that too. But there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be, if you respect where they're coming from, they're going to be opening to listening to you. Okay, some other things may be physical disabilities. Maybe it's an older crowd. It's they're having trouble hearing. I said before, distractions. Maybe it's a big room and it echoes. Uh, People in a large group, there's a discussion, not able to see each other, or you've been where, the speaker has the microphone and he's talking. Somebody asks a question. Well, no one else can hear the question because the only person that's being projected is the microphone. So it may help you to repeat it. Say, well, the question was, and then go ahead and repeat that. Expectations and prejudices. I run into this in law enforcement training all the time. I have people coming to our training that have a particular expectation of what they're going to hear. If that's not what they hear, it doesn't matter. They still hear it anyways. I'm amazed at our deputies that will go back to sheriffs and say, they taught us this in the class, and we'll actually have the class videotaped, and that is not what we said. But that's what they wanted to hear, so that's what they hear. Also may jump to conclusions. If you don't want to stretch something out and let them jump to conclusions before you get to the actual conclusion. Sometimes it's really good up front to say, look, here's the results of what we're talking about. Now I'm going to tell you how we got there and what's going on. So people aren't guessing as they go. We always use the term, if you don't give people the information they need, they will fill the blanks with their own information, right or wrong. And there may be cultural or language differences, depending on who you're talking to. Certainly, uh, as we can imagine with language, but I've run into there are interesting things with cultures too. And we teach our law enforcement officers how to deal with different cultures. It's definitely different between a Hispanic community and a Muslim community and an Amish community, how you interact with them, and Asian communities. And so you definitely could have cultural differences that could cause you problems, not just language differences. And one of the good examples of that is personal space. There's some cultures where your personal space is very distant. You don't get in somebody's personal space. That's considered threatening. There are other cultures where literally they're going to communicate with you inches away. That's not a Western society or a US society um, habit, but it is other cultures. And since we're pretty much a melting pot, you could very well, end up in that. Or maybe you're one of those people that wants to get up close and personal, and you're making the person you're talking to very uncomfortable. Okay, so let's talk digital communications. We're talking, and this is certainly going to grow, but we're talking email, text messaging, Twitter, blogs, Facebook. And I know some of you are probably rolling your eyes, but to some extent, we're all using some form of this now. I use three of the five that are listed here. I'm not on Twitter. I guess maybe I've used blogs a little bit, but not much. And now, of course, there's uh, Instagram and I am instant messaging and all sorts of other apps that I couldn't even begin to tell you. Most people use some form of this. There are advantages to disadvantages to both. But make sure you review the youth protection guidelines, because we do have some restrictions on how we can communicate with our youth as adults. Okay, so let's talk about some of the guidelines. Particularly, let's talk email etiquette. First of all, recognize that email is not confidential. What do I mean by that? Because once you send an email to somebody, they can forward it anywhere they want. They can send it out to the world. They can take pictures of the email and post it to other social media. So don't put something in email that you'd be embarrassed, because again, it can be easily forwarded and could cause problems. So you may sit there and think you're emailing the scoutmaster to talk about a problem in his unit, and he turns around and forwards it to the entire committee, of which includes some people that you've mentioned in there that may be part of the problem. So be very careful with emails. Have reasonable expectations about replies. Not everybody sits there and checks their email constantly. They may also want to think over a reply or gather more information before getting back to you. If I'm going to send out an email that has, I don't want to call it contentious, but I want to make sure that my message is received properly, I will usually reread that email 3, 4, 5, 6 times and readjust it to try to make sure I'm getting my message across. Select your email title carefully. Long titles or no subjects, people just ignore. So pinpoint a few keywords that will convey the email's message and will also catch the person's attention. This is what I said before. Reread your email before you send it. Check for spelling and grammar, but also overall tone. Be careful with humor. Humor is tough enough when you're talking to somebody. Putting humor into an email is even more difficult, and it may not be taken the way that you expect. So try to just stay away from humor in an email. I use reply all sparingly. Make sure your message is only going to those who need to see it. So if you get an email from a scoutmaster and you reply back and you don't pay attention, hit reply all, that scoutmaster may have included a whole bunch of other people on there. We actually had a case in the state where somebody sent out an email that was supposed to just go to their agency, but they sent it globally. They sent it to like 20,000 state employees. Well, if that wasn't bad enough, about 15,000 of those 20,000 all replied to all saying, hey, do you realize what you did? And then another 10,000 people replied to all saying, people knock it off. This went on all morning until finally our IT had to shut down the email system and send out a blast message telling everybody to knock it off. And then guess what happened? The next day, when all those people were out, came in and saw the email, they started it all over again. So be very careful with reply to all. Keep your emails short. Long emails can be intimidating and can make the receipt read less if the message was only about 3 sentences. So be as concise as you can. Don't ramble. If you really have to have a long discussion, maybe email's not the way to do it. Give a person a call or do it face to face. A couple other things. What you write's your responsibility. Exercise good judgment and common sense. Always include your name in anything you email or post online. If you're embarrassed to attach your name to it, you should probably think twice about posting it. Exercise good judgment. Always refrain from comments that could be interpreted as demeaning, inflammatory, or racially charged. Respect copyrights. Scout is honest. Information that comes from other sources should be identified and attributed. It doesn't mean you have to go back to, somebody and necessarily request permission. Just make sure that if you're quoting something or you've copied something from somebody else, that you're doing what's right and you're recognizing, where it came from. And absolutely protect personal information. You don't want to send out a blast to everybody saying, yeah, little Johnny had the running diarrhea, at the last camping trip. Or here's the den leader's personal cell phone number and home address, and you're sending it out to the district, unless you have permission to do that. And make sure you're careful with who you share it to. I can't tell you how many, probably daily, I get a Facebook invite from somebody I'm already a friend with. And whenever they look at their new profile, yeah, it's the same picture, but suddenly they have no friends and no information. It's somebody, looking to get me to provide information to them and to give them access to my Facebook page. Okay, so in conclusion, we want to make sure when we're talking, we're clear and concise. That the sender and receiver consider each other. You know your audience, and since we both may be having communications here, we need to understand each other. Recognize the different types of communication and always ask for feedback. I'll put in, please let me know if you have any questions, any issues, or what you think. We do surveys, that type of thing. So, always consider asking for feedback on, did they understand? How did they feel about this? Lets people know that you care about it. So again, great leaders are great communicators. Hopefully we all work on that. I appreciate your time. And I hope you all have a great day.